Mr. Lee, Ms. Casper,
Here.
Ms. French,
Here.
Mr. Horton. Hold on, sorry.
Betsy's
Ms.
on her way.
Schaefer.
Here.
Ms. Fuller, I'll check her when she gets here. Mr. Heffield. Here. Ms. Manning. Mr. Sarge.
Here.
Mr. Vogel.
Here.
Dr. Whiteley.
Here.
Mr. Zink here. Can we get a motion to approve the agenda?
Second.
Any discussion? None. Ms. Schaefer.
Yes.
Ms. Casper.
Yes.
Ms. French.
Yes.
Mr. Hatfield.
Yes.
Mr. Sarge.
Yes.
Mr. Vogel.
Yes.
Dr. Whiteley.
Yes.
Mr. Zink, yes. Can we get a motion to approve the amended October 25th, 2024 meeting minutes and the November 7th, 2024 meeting minutes?
Second.
Thank you. And for the discussion of this, that was, I forgot to change Christina from from here to absent. And so that was what the amendment was for October 25th. Any other discussion? Ms. Schaefer?
Yes.
Ms. Casper?
Yes.
Ms. French?
Yes.
Mr. Hatfield?
Yes.
Mr. Sarge?
Yes.
Mr. Vogel?
Yes.
Dr. Whiteley? Mr. Zink, yes. And we are good to go now.
Ms. Fuller, yes.
I'm checking you in at 1:10.
Said she's on her way.
Okay. And good to go.
Sorry, I was just making sure.
We're at number 4.
I was counting my
We're
board
good.
members. I was like, I'm just making sure.
Yeah, we're
Make sure
good.
we have quorum.
So we're gonna start a couple of things, just so, recap of our recent board, retreats that we had on Thursday, because facilities were kind of part of that as well. We talked a little bit about, the, construction manager at risk and the owner's rep piece. I would say we took a step in that we agreed that there is a construction manager at risk needed. I think we are still talking about when that would come into play. Looking at the 5-year forecast, understanding the bond issue pieces, so that's not quite been solidified. But I think we all agree that that construction manager at risk piece will definitely be part of the equation, and that timeline that you had provided last meeting was helpful, just to kind of keep that front and center about how that adjusts, how early you bring them on, how that adjusts. But I still think we're grappling as a team with kind of that levy and the bond and that coming first. We also talked about, again, that configuration, talking about engaging the community on that configuration and what that's gonna look like. But the million-dollar question really, before we can do that, is about busing. And again, I think it's just really important to say, I think a lot of people assume that when you talk about a 9 through 12 campus, that busing decision has been made. It has not. We are still looking at the various scenarios of what it would mean to bus all, to bus none, or to bus even maybe like a grade level or two. You know, what if you bus freshmen and sophomores? We're still working through that, and we know that that is an answer that we have to come up with to be able to really go and engage the community, because that's gonna be a question from our stakeholders. So I think, but another piece of that, which is number 4, is that OFCC update. Making sure that we kind of work through some of those pieces. So OFCC, just for my own clarity and kind of all of us here, just having talked through, if we go with the OFC funds, and I know we've talked about this, but I just want to make sure we're all hearing the same information at different times. You can take their fundage for pieces of that, and anything we want to do in addition is privately funded. Is that accurate? Are there any areas where we can't do that? Like, is there anything where they would go, no, you have to take it, or you don't get all of our portion, or anything like that? It's kind of, this is what we'll give you, and if you want above and beyond that, you fund the icing on the cake. Okay.
Yeah, the only thing is, you can't go under. So like if you went and said, okay, well, I know that your standard is 900 square foot classroom, but we want 700.
Can't do that.
You
You
know,
gotta meet
even
their
though that's,
minimum.
right,
Okay.
they'll say, no, that's a minimum. But if you say, we want terrazzo in our classrooms, they'll say, okay, well, that's above our standard. If you want to pay for that, fine.
Okay. And I know we've talked about that share of about, 68-32. Is that, well, where ours is in phases, how will that look?
So the way that works is, once you have your master plan, you've gotten all the way through and have your master plan approved, in the first segment or first project that you do that's over $1 million, that you get approved and funded, and move forward with, that is when that number locks in.
So the first time we get the
Forever.
master plan approved for anything that's over $1 million?
Yeah, once we go through the process with the OCC and they approve our master plan, then whatever segment we want to do of that plan, as long as it's $1 million or more, once we get that done, then that's when it's locked in, when you commit to
And
that.
Chris, do we have to have all phases up front, or can it be phase one, phase
You
two?
can
Okay.
segment it however we
However
want.
we want to.
So if you get this big pie here, you can cut off little pieces at a time, or half pieces, or it's really up to the district to decide how it's phased out and what segments are important. They would like to know how we would like to segment those, part of their understanding when we submit everything to them. They would like to back, what parts do you think you're gonna segment first, second, third? Or there's no segments in three? I said that should be known to them as well, so they can help with the process of that.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
question on that? Let's say we lock in the plan, we do the million, because we can do the $1 million project on the plan without asking for money, correct?
We have our own funds.
If we,
contributed to it,
okay,
yes.
so let's say we do that, we do the $1 million plan, we've locked in the 32% or whatever it is and starts the clock with our number, and then the bond doesn't pass. We still stayed locked in because we've done that first $1 million.
But we would also have to reapply every year though.
Yeah, you
I mean, we still, once the million's in, we're locked, but every year, once a year, we would
still have
still
to
have
apply
to
for ELF every year.
reapply that ELP yearly.
Oh.
But the ELF percentage can change, or did we just
No.
reapply and it stays
Reapply.
the
For
same?
approval.
So it's more just a procedural that we have to do.
Procedural,
It's
for
not
one
even
drop.
Keep it
changes.
rolling.
Yeah, to say, we still want to participate in the program, we still anticipate doing these segments, we haven't passed a bond, we're gonna have to figure it out, but we still want to participate, so,
But that locked in at $1 million thing that we do, that 32% or whatever it is.
right, it's gotta be part of the already approved plan.
Right,
But you have to have an approved master plan.
right.
Through the OFCC before you can do that, any piece of that pie.
Right.
So you have to get through that.
And according to this, option 1, 2, or 3, it looks like all of them have that approval sometime late spring to summer of 2025.
I've actually today got more detailed plans or schedules that we will review after talking with the OFCC. There's some things that we can share, and they've shifted around a little bit, and we've added a little more detail into them, but in
But-
general, those schedules that we had were,
Yes, no matter what schedule we go with, the OCC is sort of set
Always
in
like
that
that.
plan.
And so if we do that though, with the architectural drawings we have now, if they approve that, it's basically a square footage and an overall design. We would still have latitude of how we reallocated space, or would we have to go with these designs that we are currently working from?
We're not submitting complete designs of the buildings, we're giving, hey, we're gonna add additions on, we need this much square footage.
Okay,
And that, so really, from the OC start, you get all that approved up front, then they come back and we do the actual design. They'll look at the drawings and make sure it matches, you have enough square footage, you have this kind of HVAC, you have this kind of lighting as it's in our manual. So they go back and do that checks and balance, do that design process with the architect, so they make sure that you're adhering to it and not trying to say, oh, we asked for this, but we're gonna do this.
Right.
For clarification, I just thought of this with my little comment I made. Even once we pass the bond, at that point, do we still have to do procedurally board approve participating in ELP until we receive the money from ELP? Or once we would have the local share established, then we wouldn't have to do that
I think as
again?
soon as you do your first project, you're sort of locked in. We'd have to verify, but soon as you do your project, you're locked in with the help program at that point. They know you're gonna do some more.
Okay, because yeah, you'd hate to procedurally miss that.
That was gonna be is there ever a delay on their money? Because the reason I asked that, I was in a VASA conference, and there was a superintendent talking about that they had taken the OFCC money and like they built maybe the junior high and the middle school, but then, there had been a significant delay in the primary, and his community was getting very antsy about like, why aren't we doing this? And he goes, we're not doing this because we don't have the fundage. What is the possible delay time in that, or what does that look like?
Well, basically, you have to wait till your number gets called to be part of the CFAP program. So the help is, all you're doing is using your locally funded projects to build up credits. And it could be several years before your actual number comes up through CFAP, where you get the actual share later. So that's where you go, okay, whatever phases we want to do, basically be locally funded. And the last part of your plan, any kind of upgrades, additions, modifications, you can potentially use the money from the state to do that. The model I reference a lot of times is Mason schools, when they went through, did their high school, their early childhood school. They did that all through OCC, built up all those credits. Then their number came up, 7, 8 years later or so, then went into the full renovation of the middle school, added on to the ECS building. So, and they didn't have to go back to the taxpayers for that when they did that, so
But there could be a significant lag.
7 to 8 years perhaps.
Is it typically that long?
The problem with the OFCC is they don't know who all is gonna be ready for the money. You know, they only have X amount of money that they pass out each year. And it's depending on, a lot of times, school districts will defer because they can't pass their bond issue. There's this long pecking order of who gets funded. There's a chart that they have that, there's people that have deferred, there's new people, there's all kinds of things, and there's a priority list. And it depends on how much money they're taking out for each district too. So they have a hard time keeping a handle on exactly when your time frame will be.
Kind of for an example to that, I got a district up in the north that they're actually going to self-fund their entire building project, they have pipeline money. And they're going to finance it, but they're going to self-fund it, they're not going to ask the taxpayers. And because of the way this November election had went, they now have to get their general funded funding in place quicker, because so many people that had bonds on didn't get those bonds passed as anticipated. So that pushed them up to, they're getting their money. They thought it wasn't going to be till next year, but now it's going to be now. So now they have to get that in and ready to go. So yeah, there is something to do with it.
But traditionally, we're not anticipating the entire plan to be done in 5 years anyway, correct? Isn't this more of a 10-year timeline for the last phase?
I believe from from what I had gathered throughout this process, that from the time we had the bond passed and everything was ready to roll, we would anticipate getting our money from the state sometime around that 10-year line. I mean,
Which,
but that's just that state portion to us.
right. And the third part of the phase, which now I can't even remember, it's been so long. What's the third part of the phase? It's not,
That's the upgrades.
Yeah, the second part of the phase is where the buildings are being built. The first part of the phase is the high school. Okay, so the third part is the
Bringing all other
bringing
buildings
everybody
up
up to
to
OFCC
par,
code.
yes.
And again, when your number's called, you can go back and ask for a modification. So maybe there's been some changes that we thought we needed 4, but now we need a 5th building for some reason. You got your money, you can modify your plan, you can use those funds for that 5th building perhaps, and upgrade. So you can go back and modify your plan once it's approved if circumstances change. But you still just gotta work through that process. It's an ongoing dialogue with them.
But yeah, it's not, from ELP to get ELP dollars, I don't think that's gonna be a quick process to get that, but the majority of the building stuff and building movement to put in that grade band, I believe that would be covered in phase 1 too.
So now do we beg the question?
But if you look at it,
The OFCC, do we?
But if you look at the timing when a lot of our buildings are, like the Wyandottes and Devers, those buildings are at the time we get that money, they're gonna have to go through some major upgrades, so not going back to the taxpayers to get that, or when burning out our PI fund or other things,
Right.
there'll be benefits to that. The high schools will need some major updates as well, because they're getting close to, 30 years now? So, over the next 10 years, we're gonna need some major updates for some of their systems as well. So, and be able to use that money from the state instead of burning through our PI would be very helpful. So there's definitely benefit, it's
So
that
we
wait and
don't-
see game that you just don't know.
So while we're doing the additions for phase one in the high schools, we won't do any of the upgrading.
That's what I just asked, I said that won't be part of that?
Maybe some minor stuff here and there, but for the most part, our systems are working right now, you know? So we've already done some upgrades like chillers and some boilers and stuff like that, and,
There's more forthcoming. I mean, I actually got a quote on a new chiller for East High, because it's due, because there's 2 in each building, but then we just had to replace one 2 years ago at West High. And then we have one that's sort of going down.
Timing wise, do we believe we'll have all this approved? Because I'm assuming that would be a part of their, facility plan that we would have, and that could be pushing that $1 million mark. Would we have all this stuff approved, ready to go for when that happens, so that we would hit our qualification?
but chillers have to be $1 million.
No, but you add on, you could for
You could
see
do a lot.
roofing.
You could do a lot of stuff at West Front, or when in high school, so we're gonna do a chiller plus roof plus this.
Yeah,
plus
so
Right.
yes, and that would be already finished, and it's
Normal maintenance
essentially
stuff that we would
normal
have.
PI money that's
Right.
being spent on that.
And.
So it's not gonna be a stretch. It's not gonna be like a stretch for us to reach to get the $1 million.
Oh,
No.
no. I
It's some
wouldn't think so.
natural upkeep
Oh,
stuff
I
that
would
would
think
get
that
us
would be
there.
easy, yeah.
But that's not until we do the back and forth and they've locked us in. Because right now, we're not locked in yet.
Yeah, right, like
Yeah,
that.
okay.
Yeah, and, this ratio right now, the 68-32 is for FY '25, so they'll go through the spring, through the next this fiscal year, so we're locked in at that. If we get something before that, it will change again, so by the time we get on the ballot, get the project done, that number may change. That's what we know right now. The good thing is we've ticked up just a point or so
Yeah.
every year. So, in another year, maybe we're at 67-33.
We'll take it.
And hopefully not the other way,
Not
since
the
they're
other
having
way.
budget, they're saying they're having budget
Right.
challenges, that's my concern with all the crying up there right now, that it's, budget shortfalls, I'm worried the other way.
Right, so,
And this is probably me being late to the conversation. Did we look at what it would cost millage-wise to fund it ourselves? Is that even feasible? I'm just asking. I'm not saying I think it's a good idea, I'm just asking.
For us to fund,
Like, if we didn't take the OFCC money, if it was all locally funded, do we know what kind of levy or what kind of millage would needed? to
I
do
don't
that?
think we looked at that, just because at the time, we felt like we were leaving a lot of money on the
I
table.
got you.
well, I think,
But
There's no-
then we have more
I
of
don't,
a
I
say.
don't think, yeah,
I just
I
wondered.
think whatever we wanna do, if we think we need additions and stuff, it doesn't really matter if we partner with OSCC or not. If you don't partner with them, you never get that money in the
Right.
future, but you've done all this work. But if you do partner with them, now you get this opportunity to get it, so the millage wouldn't change, I don't think.
Hypothetically,
Right,
the millage that we were looking at would get us all the way through phase 2, with phase 3 being those building upgrades, which if you
correct.
didn't
Everything but
participate,
phase
then that would be
I
a
got you. In
back to
addition.
to
the taxpayer in
That's what
that
I'm
phase
asking.
3.
Okay,
Right.
okay.
Yeah, you're looking at somewhere with the drop, somewhere in the neighborhood, with the drop in today, somewhere in the neighborhood of 4, with 2 mills dropping. So net increase
Out
of
the
somewhere around.
LCC, you'd have to go back to the ballot for phase two.
Yeah,
Right.
Or charge 6 up front, because it basically, if they're not funding a third of it, and right now it's 4, you would need to go to 6, which again would equate to 4 once the 2 mills drops off, that's on the ballot right, or on the books right now.
Right, so,
many ways to skin the cat.
Yes.
yeah, but I just think from a millage standpoint, it wouldn't change based on the plans that we know right now. Right, so basically, it would prevent maybe a future ask if you want to participate with the OCC right now. Since we're doing the work.
Yeah, because I've also had the bank side look into, based around what we're forecasting the values to do, based on some of the assumptions we have, what that would then also look like to that financing number. And right now, it's right around 5% is where you're going to get the rates locked in.
And a year from now, it could be a little bit
Either way, who knows?
different.
That's new talk.
Is there a money tree somewhere? Just shake it.
Anything else we can do here?
No, I think it's more understanding, I wanna look at that timeline for what we would need, when we would need to be ready,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, we'll
To
get-
make some decisions, because I think that's gonna impact our community engagement piece.
Yeah, we'll go through those schedules in a minute, but we just want to cover a few things. We did have a conference call with the OCC. And I don't know if we want to read through each one of these or not, but if there's anything specific that stands out to you, a couple of things, just things that we looked at were like Plains and East freshmen were they had two different enrollment sizes, and the high schools were the same, but the middle schools were different. We're just trying to shore that up and change that up, little things like that. Let's see, anything else that's big that we need to understand? We talked about like Independence and Cherokee being in that orange area now as far as the percentage to rebuild versus what they would do is we had to submit that paperwork to have them come out and take a look at it, and they do basically an on-site review of that. They've taken account of the work we've done, any kind of roofs or chillers or stuff to relook at that. For the most part, you know, they say for the most part, stuff will pass. Say to get that variant or that waiver, things that would stick out, if you had ADA issues or things that weren't very good from a long-term instructional standpoint, they may say no on the waiver, but just from our understanding of those buildings, I don't see any reason why we couldn't get a waiver. We want to keep both Cherokee and Independence and New England, based on what we know right now.
And Ridge Junior.
And Ridge Junior, right. But they'll come out and do that assessment.
Yeah, it's a fairly simple process. Basically, they bring their guys out, they walk through, probably with Chris and some of us. and,
Right.
They go back and do a staff recommendation, and then it goes to the whole department, the OFCC department, and then there's an approval or a disapproval there. But I agree with Chris, I don't see any issues with getting the variance on those buildings. I mean, if they were 1923, multi-level.
The old Union building with
all kinds of
multi-levels and
problems.
stuff like that, we may have an issue with, but.
These are pretty good shape buildings.
Can I, as I try to read through some of these questions and comments, there's a whole lot of acronyms, which I appreciate is how everyone speaks, but could we perhaps have a directory of acronyms that we keep a running tally of, or else put on these sheets? Maybe I should know what they are, but I'm not sure what POR, SD, or DD reviews are. Who will do the POR, SD, and DD reviews?
SD and DD.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of inside speak in this document.
Yeah, we can put together a list of acronyms.
Great.
POR is Program of Requirements.
Okay.
That's the first step in kind of the planning of your buildings. SD is Schematic Design. DD is Design Development. And then there's CD, which is Construction Documents. And all those are steps and phases that you have to go through in the planning process. They have to be submitted to the OFCC for approval at each one of those steps as you go through the process.
We get a little glossary of that.
Yeah.
We'll add that to the minutes, all this stuff in PDF like always.
And
We'll add that in.
RPC? What's an RPC?
That
And
is
how about
the,
RPC is assigned?
that is the OFCC's representative for your project.
Okay.
What's POR again?
Program of requirement.
Thank you.
108.4.
Now we know how people feel when we speak acronyms for education.
IEPs and the 504s and the, yeah, and the PBISs and the, yeah. Mhm.
Thank you.
I think the only other thing on this piece is, I don't think we've ever talked about the preschool at all. We've always just looked at maybe being a preschool for us, but looking at the OCC's funding of that and what the requirements are. So we'd have to decide, do we think we'll have enough students to include this in the mix for the funding piece or not?
Well, if we're 13 students shy according to that answer number 10, it seems like we need to find a way to
Well, we just
get
gotta
to
understand what's required.
350 kids.
What's required by the state, though. Not all those kids in our preschool program are required by the state, right?
Gotcha. But yeah,
So-
regardless, it seems like we've got to figure a way, because that would be.
I don't think it's particularly an issue because, there again, I'm guessing the work that would happen in that building is way, way down the road anyway.
Because we did a major update of that building in 2008 when we went through our last master plan.
So just a couple rules so you know, the OFCC will only co-fund buildings that have 350 students or more. So unfortunately, that preschool number at 337 is very slightly under. So that would kick it out of funding. And the other thing to know is they'll only fund pre-K students that have the special needs or you're required to educate through the state program. So if you have extra preschool kids that are filling in classes and that, they will not count those towards their funding mechanism.
So you cross that bridge when we get there.
But I guess the question that I do have with this one slide that I have here, and it's in your booklets, is the OFCC did prepare two master plans, and they're both very, very similar. They both have the additions to the high school, the additions to the middle schools, the new elementary schools. The only difference in them is the preschool or Liberty Early Childhood Center. I'm assuming you want to keep thinking of it as a preschool only. You do not want to, at this point, to start adding kindergartners in that building to raise that enrollment, do you?
To me, we would have to do something like that if it's a difference between having our taxpayers pay all of it or if our taxpayers pay 2/3 of it. It seems like it would be, there would be somebody that we could house there.
Like maybe we put our half-day kindergarten program, and we want to keep a half-day for families in the district.
I think we have to keep a half day by law, so.
Yeah, so maybe we put the half-day kindergarten program.
It seems like there's an opportunity.
So I think those are options we can consider.
So we're short 13 students.
Okay, so
To get to the 350, is that? what
Yes.
I think there's well, we don't service a lot of preschool because we don't have capacity right now, so.
Actually, we'd be short a whole lot more than that if they don't count the typical students, right?
Correct. Correct.
How much would the renovation be at that building?
We have to look at what they went through. You know that plan with us here. It wouldn't be a lot for a while because we did it in 2008. Is that on there?
No, I've got the other master plan.
We'll bring that back and let you know.
Yeah, I think it's easier to make a decision when we know
But-
what
but
a
it-
third of that
Yeah,
dollar
but
is.
we got time to figure that out.
The only reason that comes into play is if you load that building up and they co-fund it, the total master plan is $584 million. If you take it out and say, no, it's only preschool, and right now they're saying, well, it's too small, we won't co-fund it, then your master plan is $594 million. So there is a difference in the total master plan cost. There again, this isn't really gonna come into play till way down the road.
So
The
when-
reason this is more is because if you're not putting kindergartners into this building, then you're putting them somewhere else, which is causing you to build more square footage in other buildings. So that's why it's $10 million more if you don't put those kindergartners in there and make that part of the program.
But that's kind of an interesting concept if we've talked about not having enough space in some of the other programs for growth. If you put them in from the purposes of OFCC into another building to get co-funding of that space, that would work for purposes of the plan,
Correct.
is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
So that seems like an opportunity for us to have the square footage we might need for other purposes in some of the other buildings. Perhaps.
Perhaps. Yep.
Okay, so it sounds like the consensus is that we, for planning purposes, because we do need to kind of pick one of the master plans. There's thousands of numbers that surround these master plans. It sounds like we'll go ahead with the planning of getting it co-funded. So we'll say, yes, for now, we'll say, yes, we'll put some kindergartners in that building to get the numbers up so it can be co-funded. Is that what I'm hearing? Everybody good with that? Okay, great.
Any questions about the questions? All right, Jim, we'll jump into the three schedule options, and again, this is a little bit of what we covered last time, but a little bit more detail.
More
We have
detail.
to go see the timing at the end.
Yep. Correct timing at the end.
Do these replace what are in our binders, or is this an addition to what's in our binders?
I'd leave what's in the binders and just keep building to the top.
Yeah, so this is like an update from the last one. so.
An update on the update?
Can you send these as well, PDF?
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
then-
Yeah, I'll send everything.
Perfect.
Can we go back to that last thing? I guess I'm not sure that I am landing on the same place, which again, if others are, that's totally fine.
Okay.
I'm thinking again, until we know how much just the Liberty, your child, until we know how much just Liberty is for the renovations, I don't know if we do necessarily wanna make sure that we add people there to get up to their co-funding. Because what I heard is with the master plan option 2, which is slightly more expensive, you're then allocating space in those other buildings for those pre-K kids that would allow it to be part of OFCC, but then that would ensure that we do have enough room for students with special needs classroom or an ELL classroom, whereas that's not necessarily allocated in a regular plan, having enough space for those things. So by kind of pushing the kids out for purposes of OFCC square footage planning, that would allow us to have a little breathing room in the buildings and have it be co-funded, and the cost potentially would be pretty small for when we then came back into Liberty and paid for them there.
So is there a plan, I'm confused.
I mean,
So-
I'm
Is
So,
there a plan
as
to
of
have-
now, we said Liberty's only gonna be a preschool only.
yeah,
So
Right.
in order to get that co-funded, we need to have enough preschoolers that will qualify as
Right.
special
Right.
needs ones, right?
But-
If we don't, we'd have to add kindergarten
to that.
or other students within that building that would qualify to raise it up to, that. So I don't think we necessarily have to move kids out of other buildings or create.
But did you say that there's, in some of the plans, there's room for pre-K in the buildings?
well, I thought that's what I heard you say, that if we don't fund Liberty as part of the plan, we could allocate for those students in the other buildings. Did I misunderstand that?
Like the K kids, right?
Just the K kids.
Not the, not
If you
the-
don't-
I say
if you
not
don't-
the
I
preschool kids.
misunderstood that,
Yeah.
okay, thank you for that clarification,
Because that's what I
I
got.
misunderstood.
If you don't put them in Liberty, you gotta put them somewhere else.
Okay,
Thus,
I
that
thought you
makes
were talking
build
about
more
the
square
pre-K kids as well, but you're
No,
just
sure.
talking about the kindergarten, which makes sense.
And we're only
Okay,
talking
thank you.
about the half-day kindergarten.
Then I'm not confused.
Potentially.
And there again, I think this stuff is way, way down the road, and my guessing is your master plan's gonna change before you even get to
Yep.
somewhere like this, so.
Okay, thank you for looping back, I didn't want to have the wrong assumptions going forward.
Okay. Looking at schedules. So basically, we've got 3 schedules to look at, and these are kind of built off of the schedules that we looked at the last meeting. So, a couple things we learned from, or verified with the OFCC through our conference calls last. The big thing for you to understand is the red line that I have right here on your schedules. This is basically when your master plan would be approved by the OFCC. Okay? And why that's important is before you get to this approval point, a couple things cannot happen. They will not co-fund any architectural work or construction manager work. Okay? So none of anything that you would have done prior to this, either through an architect or for a CM, would not be co-funded. Because they want to have an approved master plan before they start on that. The other thing that comes into play here is if you do start early on these activities and we go through the programming requirements, we go through the schematic design, we go through the design development, the OFCC will not do the approvals either or the reviews and the approvals of those phase submissions until there again, you have this approved master plan. Okay, so those are just some things to keep in the back of your minds. There are other things that come into play, so we'll go through them. What you're gonna find in general is all 3 of the plans that I show right now are schedules. All the lines in blue are basically all exactly the same. And through talking through the process and looking at the timelines, it seems like this is the process that really needs to happen to get you from today to an approved master plan and then get you to the ballot in '25, okay? So let's just start through those and we'll just go through these very quickly. Update the building assessments, you've already done that. That's something that's been done, completed. We have those new assessments. The enrollment study, that was also completed, that's done. Approve the enrollment projections, that has been approved and done and set back. So those things were the baseline for the building on, and those things have all been taken care of. Test floor plans and site plans. If you remember the plans that we showed last week, or not, like two weeks ago, that had the building additions, and we said those were, we were kind of testing the sites to see if we could get the additions on there, and if we could get enough space around those buildings. So that's basically what that is. We've been working on that for the last 3 months. That may continue out some more if we want to have some more discussion on that. But basically, we have tested those plans and site plans, and we think, yes, that we can get the square footage put on those buildings, and we can make it work that way. All right, so committee meetings, yes, we know we're doing these committee meetings. We have 2 more scheduled out in December currently, so we'll keep going down that process. So the next thing we think is important, of course, is to get to some community engagement. And we think timing on that should probably be maybe starting mid-January, and then maybe going about 2 months into mid-March. And I think, at least in our thoughts, there again, we'll need your input, but in our thoughts, we think it's important to start making sure the community understands what the master plan is, or what we're working towards, looking at maybe some of the phasing of the master plan, and then maybe even looking at some of the locations for the future elementary schools. So kind of laying that out and starting to gather some consensus, making sure people are on board as we're going through this process. And so you don't get all the way down the road, throw this out there, and then you get a lot of backlash or people won't understand or those kind of things.
Yeah, I think Ashley talked about it last time. People want to see how's this going to impact me, or what's it going to be like. So I think understanding what the high school additions will be, that's pretty straightforward. The renovation of Plains and East Freshman, I think people will have their heads around that. But then when we get to the 4 elementary buildings, the person will, okay, where are they going to be? How big are they going to be? That type of thing. So I think going into some early planning, coming up here, looking at, if we're going to look at those 10 buildings that are going away, maybe we don't have to identify which sites we want to go right now, but sort of rank the sites on what sites would meet the requirements. So if you look at Adina, it's tucked away back there. That could be the best location, perhaps, but that sort of puts things together to rank it and give it a score. So we go through each site, and then we can score each site based on its merits. Then we can use that to help determine what's the best fit for the building and support the community moving forward. So it's not to say that we're gonna not consider anything and just do these, but sort of have a system where we go through each of the 10 sites, the pros and cons to each, what makes sense. We can have some community input on those, what makes sense from that. Because they want to see, when we're talking about the new high schools, where are they gonna be? Is it gonna be in my backyard? Some people like that, some people don't. Right, new buildings, some people like it, close to them, some people don't.
I like highways.
Yeah.
Right, so I think we get to that level of detail and share with the community, I think it's gonna be helpful, because I think we'll get too many questions if we don't get that level of detail when we start this community engagement process, so.
So we should plan that stuff out before January, yeah.
Yeah, I think at the next meeting, Jim and I talked about trying to look at a grading scale, for the first pass of those 10 sites and what makes sense, and give some pros and cons and start to weigh that out. And we'll take the initial one, we'll go through, grade it ourselves and give additional input. And that could be a baseline for us to consider
Just to consider.
moving forward, what makes sense.
Is that something, that's not something we'd have to do in a meeting, that's something that we could all do like a homework project on our own? Or would we all take a group trip to the sites to fill out these rank sheets? Because I could see where that would be important for all members to do.
Well, I think maybe having the next meeting, having something there we can go by and say, here's the criteria we want to use.
Walk that
Or there
first,
are
we're
other
all
things we
looking
want
through
to
the
talk
same
through.
one.
Then if we need to do a site visit, and go, okay, let's see this, how this plays out.
Okay.
We can do that. We can always use overheads and.
We can bring information on how many acres are there, some of the major issues Greg would know, those kind of site circulation and that kind of thing.
And we look at the size of the building, we can almost do like we did with the additions. Okay, if you place this building on here, how would it sit on that site? You know, just a general square footage with circulation for buses and parents and. Does that sound reasonable?
You know, because I think as we talked about the traffic folks, like the sooner rather than later that we have that, the better off we're gonna be to make sure that we've just thought through all the nuances of the traffic piece and what the city might have to do with things.
Because another thing with that I would be interested in knowing is what's the best practice for a district our size, acreage to keep for future planning? You know, growth, all that, because,
Right?
you know, we don't necessarily want to keep too much, but we definitely don't want to keep too little, you know, we just want to be just right.
Well, and
The three little bears.
the fact that you have to think about what you don't keep, what we do.
There's a
Because
maintenance
you have
to it,
get
there's a-
Charter school first, so do demolish, you know. We need to understand that as what we're doing.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was is something like that architects and people talk about, or OFCC's talked about, of just kind of what should you maintain inventory wise? So if we could get more information on that as well, that would be very helpful.
I think that'd be part of the whole site assessment.
Yeah.
For that, yeah.
Okay, so, community engagement, and then, as we talked about the variances, there again, the 2/3 rule with, Cherokee Independence and Ridge Junior. We've got a line item on there. There again, this could take anywhere from a month and a half, maybe only a week, but we're plugging in basically a week and a half here to make sure they have time to get out on the site and review and go back and do the thing, so. A month and a half, I'm sorry. All right, a big one here is the board master plan approval. Okay, so what we're showing here is basically, we're given about a month and a half for everybody to make sure everybody's on board with the master plan, but at some point, you're gonna have to do a board action before this is submitted to the OFCC, and it really starts the process off. Okay, so there again, this is important. We'll get through the community engagement here, so you'll have information there. We'll make sure that we get the variances on the 3 buildings. So you'll have all that information for when you go to a board action. You should have everything and be comfortable that the master plan is good, all the ducks are on the row, and everything's ready to roll. Okay, so the OFC review and approvals, there again, this is basically a 3-month process, and they say they do take that long to get it accomplished. It basically goes through 3 reviews. First, the OFCC staff does a review of the entire master plan, and that's of just a couple people within the OFCC office. Once they've gone through it all, they take it to the OFCC department, which is kind of all the planners and all the people in there. They review it, look at it. If they're all good with it, then it goes to the controlling board. And the controlling board then spends about a month and they do a review of it. And then if they approve it at one of their meetings, they will issue out a approval. And that there again is the timeline when things really start happening and when you can start doing more things towards your project. Other things we got on here, set millage for the bond issue. We've got a couple of dates on here. They're important. Bond issue campaign. There again, we've got a line on there kind of starting in August and running through November. There again, some of the planning and that would have to happen prior to that, but we're kind of looking at a line of actually your campaign during that time period. Election day out here in 25 is November 4th. So then the very bottom line here, what this schedule is showing is you're basically going through the entire OFCC process. You pass your bond issue on November 4th, and then you come in and you hire the architect and the construction manager, and you start going through basically from the very start, from the program of requirements, schematic design, all the way through construction documents, bid, go all the way through it. Your building then is going to open up basically January of 2029. Okay? So that's kind of following the OFCC template. What I know you all don't like about that is that it does push out the opening of this building pretty far, and it is a long, slow process. If you were to go with this schedule, our recommendation would be that you continue with an architect and bring on a CM advisor, basically to come to these kind of meetings and supply you with information, kind of be a conduit between the OFCC and yourselves. Get Chris up when he needs it, that kind of thing. So that would be our recommendation there.
So the approval of the plan could go up through August. My concern comes is the deadline to file for the levy is like August 4th.
Right, but you have to do the board resolutions in June
Yeah,
and July.
that's my concern, it's a very
Yeah.
small window. If that OFCC thing approval could go all the way up to that August, yeah, it would require a special meeting or something, because that's,
Well, then-
because you have to file that by, I think, the 4th or the 8th or something right around there to get on the ballot in November. So we'd have to be ready regardless of the plan's approved. Or what are the chances the plan's not approved? Does that happen often?
My guess is it would not be likely, and that's one of the questions that I have in here is how comfortable is the OFCC with the master plan that we are working on right now? And I have not heard anything where they're questioning it or anything along those lines. He said, sure, until it goes through the final reviews,
Right.
no guarantees, but I have not heard anything that would say to me that there's questions or anything on it, so. I'm thinking it would go through, but there again, no guarantees.
Yeah, I think with the staff looking at it, the larger staff looking at it, any kind of discrepancies or anything that the commissioning body would look at us, hey, you need to go back and, I think they have enough experience to go, we're not gonna take this commission board, we think they're gonna reject it, so they would work with the district well before that, so I think it's more of a legislative process to check the box, saying you've had this commission review it. But everybody that does all of that beforehand has already done that work, to make sure it can be approved. But again, it takes one person on the commission to go, I don't like this, right? And
How many people is on that commission that approves?
Like approximately?
When I look at, any one of these timelines here in front of us, I'm worried about the capacity, I don't know if that's the right word, the capacity of the community for intake. And what I mean by that is, we're talking about potentially, and all of this can shift, I'm just putting it out on the coconuts on the table, right, that we got going on. In the spring, we're talking about strategic planning, we're talking about engaging a community in master facilities. Come in the fall, you've got a levy, you've got board seats open, like, there comes a point where all the community hears is noise, right? They don't know what the narrative is, right? You're like, wait, am I supposed to be paying attention to the master facilities or the strategic plan? Or, like, we might have to really think really smart about the timing of what is the priority, because otherwise I think it's gonna get lost. And I think we're gonna potentially divide our stakeholders into like, well, I'm picking the strategic plan and I'm picking knowledge of the master facilities. I'm afraid we're just gonna diffuse the stakeholder group, dilute it so much that nobody's gonna have clarity. So we might need to really talk about, again, we might have to talk about our timeline for the strategic plan, because I don't want that to get lost in the same time as master facilities. And nobody have really, they're not the same, but you could get really muddy really quickly.
But that would defer the strategic plan for a year essentially, because that
Well-
doesn't give you time until next winter, once this process is over.
I think maybe if we could at least get to, well, I say that, I don't wanna wait a year, I think a year is a long time. But I also think, if you could at least get the engaging of the community on master facilities, and there's pros and cons, right? I mean, you can be engaging in a community while you're talking about a levy because there's excitement and there's programming and there's newness. But again, you could have the same problem if people are kind of like, where am I looking, you know?
Or is it that we can't implement a strategic plan without a facilities plan? And it's all basically one big.
I mean, they go together, and that's
Yeah.
what we've been talking
Well, I think
about.
that's what we'll hear.
In the
if we
listening
push
session
this.
is, you have a program that you build, right? You have what you believe and you build it, right? Or you build it, I mean, they go hand in hand.
Right.
Absolutely, that's how we've been, that's how I've been sharing with it in listening and learning sessions. And again, maybe we can make the sweetest engagement package ever, and there be super clarity. I just think that that's a lot to take in, like a whole building project plus all of this visioning. And I'm just afraid it might get real muddy. So maybe it's not a whole year, but it might be a shift of strategic planning a little bit, maybe starting more in April and running through October. I don't know, but there's
Then
pros
we're
and.
gonna be in the levy, like,
Correct,
understanding of
Correct.
facilities
That-
big time.
right.
I think, yeah, it's a conundrum because I think you will get half of the community that will be like, if I'm gonna engage in a strategic plan, what I'm gonna tell you is we need a master facility plan. And then you're gonna get the other half that are like, we don't need to have a master facility plan until we know what's gonna go. Yeah, it's a,
Chicken or the egg, right?
Hmm?
Chicken or the egg.
And like I
Yeah.
said, maybe when we build
That's what I
that,
was thinking.
maybe when we build that engagement plan, we try to do them in tandem. I just think we gotta be really smart about that. Because like I said, people's just ability to, it's a lot.
it
It's
is
a lot of
It's a lot
information,
for us,
right?
and, yeah.
And one of them, you're trying to get their feedback in to change a plan, and not that you're not getting your feedback here, but you're getting your feedback and educating at the same time, right? It's just a really different dialogue.
Right, because there's a difference between the building.
Right, versus.
And what you educate them in the building.
Right,
I would
Oh,
also
gosh.
imagine that even if we do the community engagement from January to March, coming up to the levy, probably
your
in-
community engagement, when,
Right, I mean,
It's-
coming up to the levy, I
It's
mean,
January,
August,
yeah.
September, and October, we'll probably be holding community meetings explaining exactly what the bond is, how does it work, how much is it, how does it affect you as a homeowner,
and
Why
explain
is
the
it
new levy
important?
process of why
All
it
the
looks
things.
different than previous.
which would then mean you're having those at the same time.
It's gotta be strictly information.
I mean, really, when you start community engagement, we're in it from then till November, if the bond is on. Which there's nothing wrong with that, it's just you gotta be really, you have to be really strategic.
I mean, you could do some of the strategic planning right alongside the
Mhm.
first community engagement, January through March, if we're talking about those things being one and of each other, you could pair those together. But if you separate them, I almost think you can't talk about strategic planning until
Right.
after election day.
And it's a different,
That's a lot.
it's a
Which is
different,
time.
you're engaging different people too.
Correct.
When you're engaging people on the master facility plan that goes hand in hand with the bond, you've got to engage the non-parents. And the non-parents in the community don't necessarily want to be engaged in the educational part. So that's also I mean, if it's a parent with a child coming up, but if it, I don't know. It is gonna be a lot, and I don't know how to do it hand in hand. But
Yeah, unless we educate beyond just our parents, we want, like, maybe that is an opportunity. So maybe they're coming for the facilities and they don't really care about the education piece, but maybe it would help dispel the myths that we know are out there about the education piece and what the objectives and strategy
Right.
is, like, you know? like
Or we
you like-
lose them because they don't care. I mean,
Yeah,
it
exactly.
is, well, but that's the,
Yeah,
it's a-
yin and yang.
it's a scale, it's a yin and yang, and I don't know how to fix that. How to make it,
My biggest concern is getting the people to actually engage,
Right.
do what?
to get the people to actually engage.
Yeah, we do have problems
There
with
is
that. We do have problems with that, and I don't know how to fix that either.
That's my biggest concern. I think that we can package it.
I mean, I think we're gonna have to, and I think that's part of that engagement plan, and, you know, I think you and I probably need to get in a room and kind of whiteboard some things, because with the team, we're gonna have to go, I mean, we're gonna have to, it's not gonna be come in, it's gonna be go out. I mean, it's gonna be hitting the
Well,
pavement,
and-
hitting the I mean,
Right, go to places and
Yeah,
if you
I
hold
mean-
town halls that
right,
aren't in our
and we're
building.
gonna have to split You know what I mean? Like, you're gonna have to go, we're gonna have to split, cause we're so large that one person, two people can't do it. We're gonna have to split the narrative, educate, and then divide and push out the team.
But there's, in some of those, it's, yeah.
But
Sorry,
in
but in some of those, I feel like you and Adam have to be involved.
Right, there's some you can't, right,
Right,
it's
the
so many
financial
leads you
bond
can't.
piece has to be Adam in every single one.
Correct, correct.
I would recommend that.
As would we.
But then also making
I'll try to create
sure
more work for myself, but.
there's also a different narrative pre-bond and after bond.
Right,
What
sure.
we can do, you know what I mean? Like,
Well,
everything
yeah.
changes in those new levy laws.
Well, and then there's the, yeah. Here's the master facility plan, here's where we need a bond, and then what happens?
I mean, in the fall. Then you have a whole nother different set of narratives
Right.
happening.
The thing about the levy piece, though, it's not a new law, it's been around, they just never, is that we've never operated really that way. We've never operated where the superintendent and the treasurer were out there telling people, running the levy campaign, telling people.
Right.
We've
right.
always operated from a levy committee, distributing that,
I just
and you
think
guys
it's
just.
Special
did-
guest
Yeah.
support
You
role.
did the facts and informational.
I just think that facts becomes even more
Oh,
like
absolutely,
nailed down,
because
right?
we are in a different.
Right.
That and these would always be after work hours, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, I don't know what to do about that, or how to do that.
Well, we'll start brainstorming some iterations of that for sure.
Actually, do you agree with the timing of this?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was
community
thinking.
engagement?
I mean, that's what I was
I mean,
thinking,
It seems very logical to us.
of where we are,
That
getting
you
ready.
almost have to be
We have
here
to.
to start rolling out some of this information
I agree.
before you get so far down the
I
road.
agree with that.
Okay, I just want to make
Yeah.
sure you're on board with that. You want to look at the next one, or is there more discussion around this?
Yeah, I'm ready for the next one.
Just a couple of things to point out, just so everybody knows, the positive about this plan is that you don't really have to hire an architect or a construction manager until you pass your bond issue. your bond. So there again, there's no risk of upfront money or anything
Is
like
that the
that.
second plan? That's the same plan.
This is the same plan, I haven't hit the button yet.
Okay, so we're, okay,
Yeah.
I turned the page. Like, I'm so,
Yeah.
don't try to.
So this one's
Jim.
after bond issue.
I'm confused enough.
After bond issue.
There you go.
Okay, next one. All right, so this one is kind of a middle step. So this one is showing, all the blue lines stay exactly the same. That process is really the same on all three schedules. We don't need to talk about that. The real difference here is that if you want to get a jump start and try to get into your building a little bit sooner, you could hire an architect and a construction manager right after the OFCC does the approval of your master plan. And there again, if you notice, that's on the red line, so everything on that side of the red line then could be co-funded and you would get your 32% on that work that would happen. With this one, we would still advise that you have maybe an architect and a CM advisor there again come to these meetings and just help you along till you get to this point. I think the point to be made though is this work that would be done by an architect or an advisor would not be starting through the program of requirements and the schematic design and all those kind of things. It would be more consulting, bringing information to you, there again being a conduit between the OFCC and that. So I think the planning would kind of stop until you actually got to this point, and then it would proceed on from there. Okay, this one gets your building open sometime October 2028. Saves you about 3 months.
Do we worry at all that if we start construction before election day, people will say, why am I voting for this? You've already started.
No, we would never start.
No, we're not
construction.
starting construction.
So that
Yeah, it's
green
really,
line
it would
isn't
really,
starting construction?
yeah, I'm showing this all the way out. The reality is, the start of it would be architect doing the planning and that. That's 16 months worth, and then another 16 months of construction after that. So that's way out there. Okay, so the risk to the district would be, is if you hired the architect here and they started down with services and you got to here and for some reason you did not pass on November 4th, that there would be the risk of those fees. Okay, everybody good with that one? Everybody understand? Okay, the last one is, this is the schedule that's basically as fast as you can go schedule. Again, blue lines all stay the same. This one though, we're showing, go ahead and hire the architect and the construction manager as fast as you can. We're saying mid-December, could happen of this year. And you start and you go as fast as you can. Of course, the advantage is that you can get your building open about a year earlier. So that's the advantage of the plan. Of course, the disadvantage is there again, this is the stuff would not be co-funded, this work from the OFCC. And also we cannot get phase reviews done during this time. So all that would have to come and they'd be piled up kind of to that point after the red line. Okay. All right. Financially, how does it work? Go to the next page. Just some information for you to know. So if you figure 2%, we're thinking inflation is somewhere between 2 and 3%, or that's what, of course, everybody's shooting for. So if you look at that per month, you can see what I got broken down per month, what it costs. The estimated first phase, which is the addition to the high schools, is about $133 million. You take $133 million times the 0.007, it's about $250,000 per month that inflation is going up as you go. Which is a ton of money. It's a lot of money. It's a shocker. It really is.
Per month.
Per month. Or $133 million on 3% per month is like $332,000 a month.
I mean, again, it's a lot, but when you look at it in comparison to the cost of the project, it's 2% or 3% of the project. I mean, it's-
Not
It-
nearly
it's
as
just our
costly,
numbers
it's
are-
wrong.
No, 100%, 100%.
Our numbers are just big.
I mean, nobody wants to see that go up, but.
Yeah.
To swing and miss would be much more than $3 million.
Yeah. So I think the point that we're trying to show here is that there, our examples all showed starting architect early on, you're putting some money at risk, but the reality is you are saving some on the back end then. So you can look at it, there again, you'd have to balance out the risk and reward on the whole process. The reality is, this is kind of, down here is kind of the baseline. The reality is, if you go with the safest schedule, the building would cost, about $2.2 million to $3 million more than it would on the expedited schedule, with that inflation factor in there. So again, just something to think about as you think about the entire package and how all the pieces and parts come together.
Well, and to me, from a practical standpoint, 1 and 2 aren't that much different, because it's
Right.
very challenging to move during the middle of the year, especially with the magnitude of this move. So to me, it's like, the difference is really between 1 and 3, because from a practicality standpoint, I personally don't feel like 2
See
buys
the
is
value,
anything.
so you don't see the value.
Yeah.
You got like 3 months different.
Yeah.
Move in
So-
March would be for the next school year, most likely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's the matter of 1 to 3 to see if you wanna try to do it for the beginning of the 29-30 school year, or if you're gonna have to wait until the 30-31 school year. Gosh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know if we can absorb that. So many kids, so owner kids. Good problem to have, but.
So, I mean, I will say for me personally, when I hear 30-31, like, that's really tough to wait that long. So having 3, again, maybe softened a bit, because I do think that gives us like a couple months to play with. I think maybe you want that in there just for delays that are not controllable. But you would wanna be in there for that
30-31 for what?
if you're not getting into the building until 1 of 29.
29:30.
Oh, yeah, sorry, you're right, so it would be 28-29 versus 29-30. So, yeah, sorry, I was off.
I already thought on these schedules, if you have any inclination to go with the accelerated schedule, our recommendation would be go as fast as you can. Get somebody on and get the process going. Don't mess around and lose 3 or 4 months.
And then you're behind already.
You're not seeing the advantages
Right, you're not
then. So
maximizing the
if you're gonna do it, you ought to do it fast, because there again, unfortunately, $250,000 is clicking off, if you look at it that way. And those aren't
So now
exact
we're
numbers.
in March and there's 2 months left in school.
You're not moving
No,
in
you're not moving
in March
until the
anyway.
next school year.
That's what Joe was saying.
That's a challenge.
So you basically be moving in.
28.
You're be moving in
August
December.
of 28.
Yes.
We get it done, but we just
Fiscal
have some time
29
to move
over.
in and,
Gives you a little bit of wiggle room.
yeah, it
to-
gives you a little cushion,
If things
For
are.
when things run behind.
About 5 months now.
because it's not gonna go perfectly according to that point. There's gonna be some hiccups along the way.
I also feel like from
In
a
November.
community
We
perception,
can move in mid-year.
You could
they
move
might be
in
more
on option
willing
2.
to vote for a bond or
Because if
to
it's
show
opens in-
support if it's
In
happening soon.
November, you can
Right.
Right,
pick one
if
grade
it-
level
if they
to
feel
go right
like,
into
oh, this
Christmas
is gonna
break,
affect
you'd be
my
pushed.
child directly in 2028, as opposed to,
Because it's already a hard sell to people whose
That's
children
the
will
same
not
number one, though.
Experience it, yeah.
experience.
exactly.
That's true.
Whereas this
Right.
creates a
It's
whole
just
other
gives you a
year
little
of students who
Gives you
would
buffer.
would
Yeah, buffer.
benefit.
And if you're just moving 1 grade level over, then you've got extra supports.
Yeah, the first 2.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I mean, you know, back to the point of, if option 3 is the option, we gonna have to make some decisions, like, to, you know, like tomorrow,
Yesterday.
right, tomorrow or whatever it may be, around like the architect, the construction manager, and then we'll also have to make some decisions in any of these. I mean, I think the $1 million question before we can engage the community is busing. We have to have that answered, right? Because we can't go, I mean, that's gonna be that's gonna be a 9 through 12 question, absolutely.
You don't think that we can do that in conjunction with getting feedback from the community at the time? You think it has to be?
I think we would at least have we're kind of hedging this way, but we want your feedback. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're
Yeah.
kind of thinking this, but we want your feedback. So if this is a swing and a miss, kind of, you know, let us know. But I think the reason I worry about going out and just saying we want your feedback is then I feel like you kind of make both groups unhappy, because they're like, well, you didn't listen to me. I gave you my feedback, you didn't listen to me. Versus like, here's where we are based on all of this data and all of these facts. We do want your input on that, and it might adjust it, versus like, I'm gonna take your input, but 50% of you are already gonna be mad because I went in a different direction.
that's with everything we do.
Right? Because I think it's really about the data driving the decisions, right? We have to look at that financial savings or the customer service or the programming, all that stuff we talked about, and say, what do we as the educational entity think is the best road? And I think we're gonna have to sell the heck out of that, wherever we land.
Well, yeah, and I think that, yeah, that has to be a decision at some point, because,
And again, both narratives, and we talked about this in the retreat. Talk about customer service, you're not wrong. You talk about programming, you're not wrong, right? It's just which narrative do we think is the best narrative for the here and now and the long term?
and the options of if you, this, you don't get this, or.
Correct, correct.
Because again, I keep saying,
No,
if
you're
there's not a
right.
money tree in the backyard, we
Correct.
only have so much, and are you willing to risk
I know what you're saying, programming,
programming, you know?
Mhm.
I was gonna name it programming, but now I'm afraid to, because,
special.
yeah. Yeah.
consistent specials, 5 days a
Elementaries want
week, and
specials.
every elementary, is that worth busing that could be at whatever capacity?
Well, I think too, yeah, you have to weigh different options for different people. Like
Correct.
Specials at the elementary, that's their level. At the junior high,
Or
I
as a
want
high
four
school
language.
parent, and as a high school parent, you're gonna say, I want busing maybe, right? Like, it's all relative of where you
Elementary
are.
one special so they get to high school, then they
Well, the busing, but it's all
Right,
relative
exactly.
of what's your 20 square feet that you're in at that time, right?
Now, is it still fair to assume that 10% contingencies on most of these projects, like was always the kind of stereotype before?
The contingency is built into these budget numbers that we've been looking at.
Built into the OFCC, but, okay,
They're built in there.
okay.
There's contingency in there. There's soft costs, there's.
So then
basically-
hypothetically,
basically, those are turnkey numbers.
hypothetically, then it could be 10% less than those estimates.
Could be.
Hypothetically.
But poor planning
Hypothetical.
could lead to a 25% contingency.
Could be.
That's the other thing. So even though like, I'm a little nervous about that inflationary, because if we do not plan it right, then it could get way more expensive.
You mean like $3.3 million more? Like that?
Oh, no, add another zero, like 30.
Chris, remind me again, for the construction manager risk, we don't have to do, like, we can just pick that person, give them a contract and go, right? What do we have to do,
You gotta
like,
go through selection process.
right, that's what I mean, okay.
You do Qualifications process.
Qualifications process.
Chris, you know that process well. Won't you, can you review the CM process of hiring?
Yeah, so the first step is to submit, or to solicit qualifications, and so any interested construction manager will submit their qualifications, and then you usually shortlist 3 of them to then interview, but part of the interview, prior to the interview, they then propose a cost framework. So you're providing them kind of a budget and the scope, and then they're saying, okay, well, this is what we would propose for how we would staff it, what the cost of the staffing would be, what the
Pre-design services.
the pre-design, what the pre-design services would cost, and then for construction, what their, what essentially their markups would be. So their markups include a CM contingency, so that's a contingency that's specifically for their work, and then also a profit, basically their profit, their markup. And those, so that cost structure data, along with their personnel data, you can use to evaluate between multiple entities. So you interview the 3 and you determine, or you evaluate what you like about who they are and how they present, but also what the cost implications are, and you make a total best selection based on that. It doesn't have to be the lowest cost. But yeah, it gives you the ability to choose who you want to work with without having to pick the lowest, the absolute lowest cost, but you go into it kind of knowing. And typically in that scenario, you're picking the person or the entity, you're only obligated for the pre-construction, and you go through that, and if for some reason through pre-construction, you don't like them anymore, you can let them go, pay them for pre-construction, you can hire somebody else. But generally, I've never seen that happen. Generally, you would keep them on for the construction. One thing I will mention is that in all of these, go back to one of the other ones.
Go back to one.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. So like the architect CM selection is indicated here. That process of selecting an architect or selecting CM is a multi-month process. By the time you put out a request for qualifications, you receive them, you interview, make a selection, the board approval. So that takes at least a month, usually 2 or 3 months. you could start that process a couple months in ahead and just have it lined up so that the day after election day, you award the contract and you go in. If you don't, then all of that was just, so I think this kind of assumes that you're kind of ready to go, not that you're starting that process. And that would be the same on any of them. Of course, the one that has it starting in December, I mean, you obviously just be starting the process in December because we're already a month ahead. Something else I'll just add, the blue bars, as Jim said, this is kind of the process that OFCC has kind of baked in, that if you're going for a November bond issue, they're gonna have their approval around July, and then they kind of work back from that, so that this is all kind of their standard process. Can this be expedited? Maybe a little. You're kind of pushing against the big system. But I think that if the decision were to be made, hey, we want to go full speed ahead, you would need to make some decisions to get the architect going full speed ahead. So that would kind of expedite some of the decisions that would maybe allow the OFCC approval process to go a little quicker. So if that was your decision, this might be able to shift a month or two back, which could reduce the overlap a little bit. We don't want to promise that because this is kind of outside of our control and this is their standard process, but just.
But then it squishes everything else into a smaller window.
Sure, absolutely.
You have to make decisions.
There's a reason why this is their process, because they know there's a lot of stuff that has to happen
Right.
but that's kind of what it is.
Any other questions about schedule? Just want to highlight this next one real quick. Not
Yeah.
a whole lot of detail.
Yeah, I think we go pretty fast. So, in your handouts for today, I really just put in some sample OFCC documents so that you would kind of understand, you could look through them and you could kind of understand how we're getting all our numbers, how everything's kind of hooked together and connected in. So, and I will say, like, this very first one, this is a sample OFCC building assessment. This is for claims. So, basically, it gives some general information. If you look at this sheet, this is kind of a summary sheet, and I think we've talked about before, when these buildings are assessed, they had an architect come down from northern Ohio, they come down and they went through all your buildings. They looked at every one of these different systems within your building, and then they said, okay, how much is it gonna cost to bring it up to basically a new building or a new system? And then those numbers are listed there, the assessed dollar values, okay? So a lot of times when we're talking about the assessments, this is the summary sheet. There's one for, there's a whole packet for all 22 of your buildings, basically. And the documents that I've given you, this is only a small portion that you get for each building. There's actually a lot more paperwork that goes with it, but I didn't want to overrun you with paperwork, so.
So like Chris and I were talking, this was when they were on site doing the
Correct.
assessment in 2018,
Correct,
which is
And-
6 years ago from their findings then, so.
that is correct.
A lot's changed in 6 years.
But they basically update the cost sets,
Yeah.
but they have not come back and reassessed the buildings. These are from 2018.
Right, so that's what happened would be, if they come out and did an assessment, what other things have you done to planes? If you put a new roof line, if you put a new chiller, boiler, have you done those things? They'll update that cost assessment piece as well,
Yeah.
so. This is just based off their initial assessment 18, and they do costs from that, not taking into account anything we've done to help upkeep or maintain the building. So some of these costs may be a little bit more than it actually would be, because maybe you don't need a new roof, it pushes that out a little bit further, so, but it's in the ballpark.
Help me with page 1 of that report. It shows student capacity, for example, at this building of 809, but current enrollment at 1140. How, it seems odd that Plains would have a student capacity of 809, especially given that it had 1140 students in it.
There again, they use a square footage per student, or they know how big Plains is. and they assign, there's so many square feet per student.
Okay.
So that's how many people they say should fit in that building. One other thing I'll point out here real quick, there again, each one of these categories that you see, there'll be a page that basically addresses each one of those categories. So if you get the full report, this is just happens to be one on the roofing. So what they do is, they do a little write-up of what they see when they're up on your roof. And then here's where they actually tell the work that they say needs to happen on that roof. And there again, there's a page for every one of those categories on every single building. And if you want those, if you're interested, we can send you those PDFs, and you can distribute those. But it's, it's a binder this big. So, the next document is a sample master plan. So there again, this is the document that basically outlines the master plan for the entire district, okay? So if you kind of flip through there, if you go to this page where it has some of the color blocks, so there again, at the top of each column, they have every one of your schools listed. These are on multiple pages. Anything that you see with a gray tone over it, that means they're either decommissioning or that building will be coming offline, okay? So there'll be, if you look at the bottom of those columns, you see a lot of zeros most of the time, or sometimes we'll have demolition costs, so there'll be smaller type numbers.
So when you look at the first one, it needs to be ungray.
It does. This is the one
That we just
that we just talked about,
Right, right.
and I'm showing the other one, so we'll get the other one put in there. Yeah, you could pick up there. But anyway, you can read down through these line items. I won't bore you with it, but there's a lot of information in here. It tells about what the renovation cost is. It tells about what a replacement cost would be. It has stuff about abatement, demolition, all those type numbers are in there. You can read those, lots and lots of information. And then there's multiple pages of that. And then they also even had your proposed new buildings here. If you go to the last two pages, basically you can see new elementary school 1, 2, and 3. They're listing out, there again, you can see the projected enrollment. They're saying 988 in those buildings, PK5s. And then you can come all the way down to the bottom and you can see they're about $38 million up top. Somewhere in that range. So there again, lots and lots of information. If you really want to see how everything's laid out, you can do more study on those. And then finally, this is, we've talked about the program of requirements today, the POR, that is on the POR. So what this is there again, this is an example for planes. And what happens here is when you're programming the building, they want to know how all the spaces within the building are used, because they need to fit into their different categories. And their categories, as you can see, are like academic core spaces, specialized services, administration. There again, they have all these categories. And so they want to know how many square feet of existing building in each one of these categories there are, how many square feet would you be adding of those categories? And then it does a lot of math, and then it comes down and it gives you a total. Again, up at the top, it tells you how many students are in it. It multiplies by how many square feet per student, and it gives you a total building square footage. So all the numbers that you've been seeing that we've been using when we tested the plans, we're getting those numbers off these PORs, or program of requirements. This is the second sheet of the POR. This answers a question that we had last week, actually. We were asking about how many students fit in each space, or how many classrooms you have to have for so many students and that kind of thing. The way the OFCC does it now is basically they just say they have a POR summary, and they have a space that's basically for academics, and it's chunked with classrooms, music rooms, technology, visual arts, a number of different things there. And they say in that building then, you know how many square feet the building is, you need to have 141,489 square feet of academic type space. Okay, so that's kind of how they define it. It's not how many classrooms do you need, it's how many square feet minimum do you have to provide in that building, okay? And then another interesting thing that they have is under phys ed spaces, there's a maximum space. There again, what they don't want to have school districts doing is building 12 gyms and 3 wrestling rooms and only 5 classrooms. So there's a minimum education space and a maximum PE space. And there again, all these numbers are automated through their spreadsheets. Actually works very well. And then there again, lots of paperwork that's filled out. This is for, there again, one of the categories is the core academic worksheet. And there again, this is when you go in and there's a column for existing middle school square footage. So like here we've listed in under classrooms, you had 28 classrooms at 760 square feet for a total of 21,287 square feet. We're saying the new middle school, we would be adding in classrooms and then you get a total up over here. So there again, every space within your building is highly defined and they want to know that the numbers fit into those categories. So there again, this POR there again, it's a big, huge document. I've given you just a little piece to kind of give you a feel for how it works.
Okay, so I'm not sure, I just wanna make sure I understand, so when you say that each fits in the category, so if you decided to go with their maximum for the PE space, for example, and then you decided a little further down the line that you would prefer to use some of that space as classroom space instead of gym space, as long as, will they still fund as long as it's this total square footage? Or you have to maintain whatever you put in for PE space as PE space?
As long as you,
As long as the total is the same where
yes,
you
the
go?
you cannot take academic space and use it for PE, but you can take PE space and make it academic.
Okay,
They're encouraging academics
okay.
is their goal.
But the
That's a
point,
good thing.
the point of doing the POR is to make those decisions up front as to what areas you're allocating to the different spaces. So you get the POR approved first, then you go into the schematic design, and things can change a little bit, but basically your schematic design, which is your layout of spaces, should reflect what the program requirement says. So if you have, say we're gonna have this much academic space, we're gonna have this much athletic space, the schematic design should reflect that very closely, and then the design development. So their whole process is to try to keep districts and architects from changing things all through, because,
To have as much forethought on the front end that you.
Yes.
It's a building
Yes.
process.
get it set up. So to your question of, can you change it? Well, you can, but once you make the decision to move on, you can't make radical changes from it, because then they'll be like that, no, that's not in accordance with the program requirements that you already approved.
But I guess just as we continue to look at how educational space is evolving, and today, buildings have cafeterias, in the future, they may not. Say we go with this, we do the design as stated, 5 years from now, we decide, we're going to a completely decentralized cafeteria and we're gonna use that space for something else. At that point, we would have the flexibility, this has already been built, we're done partnering with them on that building. It doesn't lock us in forever
Oh,
to
you
not
could- yeah.
have flexibility
Once
of
it's
how we
built,
use space.
Yeah.
you can change it, you can do whatever you want.
They
They're
basically
not gonna
sign
pay
off
for
on
it.
it and
Yeah.
it's yours.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, Chris alluded to this, that it's not uncommon to modify the master plan for like phase 2. So if things change and like in phase 2, you decide, oh, wait a minute, we've been overbuilding our dining room space or our media center space, we want to allocate those to more classroom space or whatever, then there's an opportunity to do that in the next phase. And if that that may not require a modification of the master plan, it may just be that you do the PR differently on the next phase. Or if it does, then you can look at modifying the master plan, but each phase gets locked in, and each piece gets locked in, and that's part of what you sign up for with the OFCC, which is, it's good and bad. It does force decisions to be made and to move forward in a logical way and not just keep changing decisions all through the process, which can delay things and cause.
Costs money, more money.
Yep.
Every change order is more money. Built a house.
So my last document in your packet for today is an AE, which is Architect and Engineer Scope of Services for K-12 projects. I put this in here just so everybody would understand if you hire an architect for the program requirements or schematic design or design development. These are the scopes that the OFCC puts in the architects and engineers contracts. So we would be following something similar to this as a process. And so these are the kind of services that you could expect and would kind of understand at each step as you're going through. So there again, it's lots of reading and not particularly interesting reading, but if you're so inclined. And basically, that's what we've had for the day.
So our next meeting is December 4th. Julie, are you out of town during that time?
I leave for a Butler Tech trip, but my flight is at 6, so I can come to the meeting, so I'll leave from the meeting.
So really, I think at that meeting, I mean, and we can, we can talk to Isaac and Doug as well, but I think we need to kind of walk out of that meeting knowing option 1, 2, or 3. If it's 3, we need to start on that construction manager, or, we need to get on that. And then I also think we need to lean a little bit more one way or the other about busing, so we can start to kind of build that narrative.
My concern with that is that, I guess we could do it individually, we don't have a meeting before then.
Right, that's the problem.
A board meeting
Right.
to have that discussion.
Well, and that's why, well, we might, but I mean, we can look at that.
If we did, we could include that.
Yeah, we can include that.
I have these packets for other reasons too. So,
I can take those.
You want to take those with you?
So that might be we can look at that at time.
There's gotta be some discussion here.
Is there anything that you would like us to bring to the next committee meeting? We'll work on some of the site stuff with Chris. Is there any other information? I made several notes here that we'll get some questions back. Was there any other big topic items that you don't understand or want us to bring information on?
I guess I would be curious, again, we have our own lens that we're looking at it through, but of those 3, is there a recommendation that you think makes the most sense, is practical, is the best use of resources? Kind of if there's any sort of pros and con list or rating system, rubric, you could help us walk through with those. I would, whether that's our administration, whether that's in conjunction with you guys, I feel like it would be helpful to have.
It'd be helpful to have that before we have a board discussion.
Yeah, to have some sort of rubric of assessment of this and input from people who have more experience in this than we do.
I only built a 3,000 square foot house, not a K-5 building. Yeah, so that.
I mean, we could certainly put together a list of pluses and minuses that we see.
Okay.
Is that,
Yeah.
you'd like to see that? Okay, yeah, we can certainly do that for each one of the schedules.
But I think as an administrative team, we'd sit down and look at that as well.
Yeah, I agree.
To maybe get there, so then you guys can be the next
Yep.
level and then you can present.
Yeah, we can go from there.
When would
I
you
think
need
that would
that
be very
back?
helpful.
What's your target date on that?
We have executive team meetings on Tuesday, so we have one on the 26th, we also have one on the 3rd.
What's the date today? That's
Today's the 20th.
well,
much like sulfur.
We could probably, try to get something next couple of days, right?
Yeah. I think we could get
So
some
we need to
bullet
purchase
points
land.
down and
Correct.
get those over to you.
Absolutely. And again, looking at the,
Can we clarify that we are not decentralizing cafeterias right now?
Oh, sorry. We are not currently decentralizing cafeterias.
That's the least of
It's
our
just-
problems.
We have an audience. Yeah, yes,
Thank you.
Sorry.
I'm next tomorrow. What a busing.
Yeah. Yes, I apologize. I just, like, again, things are just changing and people are looking at things differently.
Currently,
There,
ODE audit as we speak, so yes.
Yes. yes, there
On
was a,
location.
there was a school that presented at Capitol Conference that talked about how they did that, so it was just kind of that's probably why it came top of mind to me, so I apologize. Yeah, all sorts of things happening in schools.
We are making no decisions at this meeting.
That's right, we are discussing.
so bring back for the next meeting too, we'll be looking at the sites and the pros and
Yep.
cons for each site for the possible new buildings, right?
So that we
As a
can
first
start to
pass.
work through
As a
that.
first pass.
Yep.
Anything else beyond that?
I think that'll be a pretty hefty agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do too, the sites,
Yeah.
just looking at
Just
the
the
sites.
sites alone, yeah.
Right.
And that might be a good reminder maybe to really see if there's a possibility that Doug and Isaac could join us for that meeting.
I do think,
We're all fine.
Doug will be
Isaac
there, I
said-
think,
Isaac did not commit, but maybe
Isaac
he
did not
would if he
commit,
knew
but,
that.
yeah,
If he knew the scope of
Yep.
it. Yeah, Doug's out of town. I knew he couldn't be at this one, but I think he's gonna be.
he's at all others, yeah.
It's, yeah, if we can get, see if Isaac can get it,
Okay.
because like, there's a lot of decisions that
Yep.
will semi be made and.
We get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Schaefer?
Yes.
Ms. Casper?
Yes.
Ms. French?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller?
Yes.
Mr. Hafford?
Yes.
Mr. Sarge?
Yeah.
Mr. Vogler?
Pass it
Dr.
out.
Wiley?
Yes.
Mr. Zink at 2:44, yes. Okay.